the one and only Elon Musk is here. I could have introduced him as Tony Stark. And with that jacket on, you look like Tony Stark. We have a lot to get to about Tesla, about SpaceX, about entrepreneurism, and about everything. However, you are in the news for some reasons that you may not wish to be, right. Which is that there have been now 3 fires in these Tesla vehicles, with the most recent one in the past week. And there are questions, lots of questions in the Wall Street community, among the regulatory community that wants to understand all this. And so I want to do this. I want to understand what you understand about this. There are rumors that there's going to be a recall. What is going on with these fires?
Sure. Well, there's definitely not going to be a recall. There's no reason for a recall, I believe. In fact, I think the perception is, if you read the headlines, it sounds like Teslas have a greater propensity to catch fire than other cars, and in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. The rate of fires the average rate of fires for gasoline cars is about one fire for every 1,300 cars. At Tesla, we now have almost 25,000 cars on the road. We've had 3 fires, so it's sort of roughly 1 for every 8,000 cars. So we're about 5 times less likely to have a fire than the average gasoline car. That doesn't mean we have zero likelihood. It's sort of law of large numbers, and statistics suggest that they would. But the headlines are extremely misleading. In fact, if fire risk is your concern, you would have a great deal of difficulty being in any better car than the Model S. As I said, it's 5 times less fire risk than the average gasoline car. Moreover, in the history of Tesla, we've never had a serious injury or death in any of our cars. So this is, I mean, so maybe there is a car that is as safe as the Model S, but there is certainly not a car that is safer, because you would have to have less than 0.
Let me ask you this. Well, when you walked in, and I was thrilled to see you, I've compared this gentleman to the next Steve Jobs, but when you walked in, I said, "How are you?" And you said, "It's been a tough week." When you hear about a fire like this, what happens? Bring us inside the room for a moment. What happens at Tesla? Because I imagine everybody says, "Oh my goodness, there is clearly issues and concerns in the marketplace about batteries and fires, period." I mean, that's where this all begins. And then what do you do?
Well, I guess we kind of see what the reaction is. And then, in this case, the reaction is extremely inaccurate and unreasonable. The fact that there are 200,000 gasoline car fires per year in the United States. 200,000. There are, on average, 250 to 300 automotive fire deaths in the U.S. There are about 1,200 to 1,500 serious fire injuries per year. How many times have you read about that? Can you recall
No.
one instance?
In complete fairness. Fairness.
Exactly. So it's like, wow, this is extremely unreasonable and wrong. The expert press, in the sort of automotive industry, so like take the automotive news editor at Automotive News, actually wrote a great article kind of debunking the fire risk of the Model S, because they know that the propensity for fire is vastly greater in a gasoline car. But in the popular press, unfortunately, it's easier to report on sensation, even though that is demonstrably false with a simple Google search.
So just to explain to everybody what's happened in these 3 fires, because there's a sense that these cars got into accidents. From what I understand, by the way, every driver of the cars is then asked to get a new car.
Yes, exactly.
But that there's something going on where something underneath the car is...
Ask for a replacement Model S as soon as possible.
Have you had conversations, by the way, with any of the people who've been in accidents?
Yes.
What do they tell you?
It's the best car they've ever driven. In all three cases, they think they were saved from serious harm by the Model S, and if they had been in a different car, they would have been seriously injured. And in the case of the second fire, probably dead. In the case of the second fire, that was in Mexico. It was, I won't comment publicly on the exact speed, but it's sort of 4 times the maximum kinetic energy that a car is supposed to be survivable at. The accident was in multiple parts. The first impact was a concrete roundabout where 15 feet of concrete wall was sheared off, of 8-inch thick concrete wall. It was a curb wall, so like a foot high type of thing. Then the car bounced into a 7-foot tall concrete wall, smashed through that. By this time, the wheels had been torn off. So it was just skating along on its belly, basically, on the battery pack. And then it finally came to a rest against a tree. The driver and passengers got out and walked away. Afterwards, there was a small fire in the front.
Okay. Final
fire! So, I mean, it's sort of like, okay, let's say that which this is probably the wrong analogy, but let's say the Titanic, okay? Instead of the Titanic sinking, if it had smashed through the first iceberg, smashed through the second iceberg, came to a rest on the third iceberg, all the passengers disembarked safely and bought another ticket on the Titanic. And then the newspaper report was kitchen fire on the Titanic.
Okay.
It's not the point.
Final question on this topic, and we're going to move on, which is this. Has any regulator contacted you about this? And what is the threshold for deciding that you need to look at these types of issues more meaningfully in terms of either thinking about either recalls or changes in the production of these vehicles? And I know that you consider this vehicle to be safe.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm somewhat of a perfectionist, and safety is like as our number one priority. It was always the number one priority in designing a car because I drive it, my kids are in it, my friends are in it. It is the absolute number one priority. And in fact, when our car was tested by...
Consumer Report, safest car on the road.
Yeah.
By a long shot.
Yeah, it has... The Model S, when it was tested by the federal government as well, it got the lowest probability of injury of any car ever tested in history. In other words, you could not drive a safer car. Right. If there was something that we thought would negatively affect the safety, we would immediately do a recall. And in fact, there was something earlier this year which was basically a bracket. There were no injuries. There were no near injuries. But we discovered a slight issue maybe with one of the rear seatbelt brackets. We recalled all the cars and replaced the bracket.
Got it. Let me ask you a different question. I think of you as an entrepreneur, someone who likes to operate your business and think about the future and what the future should be like. What is it like, though, at the same time, running a company that has become not only a sort of pop culture sensation, but this market sensation, where you have a stock that has run up, for those of you, who've been counting, at one point it was up 474% this year. Right. It's come down a little bit, but you're still up 307% this year. Sure. In terms of how much you think about that issue, how much your employees think about that issue, what it does to the culture, I mean, this is sort of a bit of a wild ride that you're on.
Yes. I keep thinking that it'll get less of a wild ride, but that seems to keep going. I actually think that the high stock price was somewhat distracting. In fact, I went on record as saying that I thought the price was higher than we had any right to deserve. Now, I mean, that said, I do think long-term that the price will be, or the value of the company will be well in excess of that. But to give us that valuation now is to have a lot of faith in our future execution, which we'll do our best. We'll do our best to meet that faith. But I mean, I don't believe in sort of talking up a stock or, I mean, I certainly wasn't trying to talk it down, but I was just trying to be accurate. I mean, I think the stock's a pretty good deal at where it is right now, but it was probably a bit high before.
Right.
That's my honest opinion.
How do you feel about running a company that is clearly in the public eye? We were talking in the back. There's a piece in a newspaper today. George Clooney is commenting. I've now quoted George Clooney twice today because we were talking about Dan Loeb earlier today, and I quoted something to him. But George Clooney was commenting that he got stuck on the side of the road too many times with his car, and he's gotten rid of it. How do you run a company? I mean,
that's not quite accurate. So,
what I said or Clooney?
What you said. And I think so. The Clooney comment was like it was a needless comment, needlessly reported, because he made an offhand comment in an Esquire article by Tom Janot, who for some reason doesn't love Tesla, that Clooney said that his 2008 Roadster broke down, and so he sold it at a charity auction. That was in 2008, so it's kind of like that was 5 years ago. That this happened. It's not a Model S. It's not even recent. It's not really news. I'm not sure why it was even reported. I mean, it like saying, my iPhone 1 in 2001 had a bug.
Right.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about. You talked about the valuation of the company. You've started to sell more vehicles in Europe now.
Yeah.
Less vehicles in the U.S. Or because of this, it will be less vehicles in the U.S. There have been some analysts and folks who have speculated that maybe the demand in the United States right now has already reached some kind of peak level. Do you buy that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the main reason I think we got dinged on the valuation of the stock price was that we are, at least in the short term, constrained on production. So it's not, we're not demand constrained, we're production constrained. Right. And it's going to take a bit of time to work out the production constraints.
Right.
I mean, our volume is increasing, it's just not increasing as fast as if we didn't have that production constraint. So, yeah.
Okay. Take us to the future. What are the roads going to look like 10 years from now? Right now, you're building charging stations all across the East Coast and across the country. If you go on their site, you can see this map and see how it's all going to roll out. What percentage of cars will be fully battery operated? What percentage will be hybrids in terms of new vehicles that other auto manufacturers are producing? And I ask it in part because I remember talking to some executives at Toyota recently, and they said, look, we can't make a bet on one thing or the other. We can't, because it could be natural gas that could be the big winner in this. It could be batteries. It could be a combination. It could be some other thing that we haven't thought of yet.
Well, it's difficult to predict the intermediate, but I feel confident in predicting the long term that all transport will be 100% electric, with the ironic exception of rockets. And unfortunately, there's no way around Newton's third law. So aircraft will be the last because of you need a very high energy density in the battery pack to have long distance aircraft or air travel. But everything's going to go fully electric. It's kind of weird that we're not. I mean, I think people will look back on this era like we look back on the sort of steam engine. It's quaint, and we should have a few of those around in a museum. But it's not how people would drive.
How far are batteries, though, generally from being widely adopted, safe? I mean, you guys may be doing it better than anybody else. I remember when the 787 came out originally, you had some comments about how they had produced them.
Yeah, I mean, the 787, the issue was spontaneous combustion. I mean, I think it's understandable if the 787 had, if it crashed and there had been a battery fire. Again, battery fire would be not the point, but the issue on the 787 was the spontaneous combustion. Yeah.
If you got a ticket, by the way, an airplane ticket, I know you probably fly Musk Air, but when you fly commercial air, if it said that it was a 787 plane, would you fly on it today?
I guess so. I mean, it wouldn't be my first choice as an aircraft, but it's
because of the safety, or because you'd prefer to fly privately?
No, I mean relative to other airliners. My favorite airliner is actually the 747. I think that's just an awesome design. It's a fast airliner. Right? It's the fastest of the airliners, actually, right. And quite aerodynamically efficient. And I like the look of it, honestly. So. That was a ring. I mean, that's sort of Hall of Famer right there. The 787 is kind of an improved version of the 777, and I just think it's a bit disappointing because its main attribute is being 10% more efficient per passenger mile than the 777, and 8 of those 10 points come from the engine. So it seems like a lot of money to spend to get 2% more efficient on the airframe side.
It sounds like you've thought about this a lot. Do you want to make airplanes too?
I do think that there's an interesting opportunity to create a supersonic electric vertical takeoff and landing jet. And I think that would be really great.
How far are we from that?
Well, it seems unlikely to come from Boeing or Airbus, given that they seem to be focused on very incremental improvements to the planes as opposed to radical improvements. But it could come from a startup. I mean, if I were to have another company in the future, which would not be anytime soon, I think that would be the thing to do, is to do an electric aircraft.
You want to do an electric aircraft?
Yeah, and supersonic and vertical takeoff and landing actually work well with electric.
So are you a believer? Sebastian Thurn believes that it'll be like the Jetsons by 2050. This is one of the guys who started Google Glass.
Flying cars?
Flying cars everywhere. Is that directionally how this all goes for you?
I kind of like the idea of flying cars on one hand, but it may not be what people want, because if you have a huge number of cars and you have mechanical failures, then I think we'll sort of vaguely be wondering whether the car's going to land on your head, or a house or whatever. So I think that's a concern, and then maybe there's also a question of noise pollution and to what degree does it affect the skyline? Is it just buzzing thing of cars?
How about driverless cars? So Google is out there with its Google car. How far are we from driverless cars and driverless Tesla cars?
Well, so the approach that Tesla is taking in this regard is to develop active safety and do active safety in the limit. Things like active cruise control, keeping in the lane, doing automatic passing and that kind of thing. And then gradually improving active safety until ultimately the car is able to drive itself in long term in virtually every scenario, maybe every scenario. The threshold, I think, for something to be autonomous is it's got to be much safer than a person driving a car, because it'll just be held to a higher standard. It's kind of like as an electric car, even though we're much safer than a gasoline car, we're held to a much higher standard. And I think it's going to be the same thing for autonomous cars. I do think it'll happen, but for it to be truly autonomous, you have to take care of these corner cases. And so getting to 90% is one thing, but then it's going to be another factor of 10 harder to get to 99%, another factor of 10 to get to 99.9. Then it just becomes exponentially more difficult to get rid of the corner cases.
So how far out is that?
To get to the 99.99, like 6 nines or something like that?
Something that you let your kids in the back seat.
I think that'll be a while. I would say it's probably at least more than 10 years, maybe 20 years.
Right. I have a friend who's an entrepreneur who sent me an email last night knowing that I was going to see you and said, the question you need to ask, Elon, is how many ideas does he literally have a week? And by the way, we were in the back, and just Elon and I felt he had 10 new ideas. How do you sort through them? How do you decide which ones are good and bad? And for example, you came out with this Hyperloop idea, which you went public with, something you're not going to do on your own. But how do you even decide to do that? I mean, what's going on inside your brain, if you could try to unpack it for us?
Well, usually it's there's something that makes me not like the future, or it's not like some element of the future, and then wonder whether there's some way to fix that. So, in the case of the Hyperloop, it was like, we're building this train in California, and it seemed very expensive. and not that fast, and it seemed to be not as good as what they've done in China or Japan. And so I was like, wow, that's kind of depressing. In fact, the electric supersonic plane, I've got a design for that in mind. And that came from when the Concorde was canceled.
Of course you do.
So when the Concorde was canceled,
right.
I was like, whoa, that's sad. Now there's no supersonic transport. And, is the future getting worse? And it bothers me when it seems like the future is getting worse. So that's where the supersonic electric plane thing came from. And then the Hyperloop was, well, what's the best way to do mass transit between two cities, like LA and San Francisco? Short of teleportation, what would you do? That would be really great. I don't know how to do that. So the next best thing within the known laws of physics that I could think of was the Hyperloop. I'm pretty sure it would work. And other people have have done sort of simulations and they've said it will work. So.
2 more questions because we're going to run out of time. You are a serial entrepreneur and a successful serial entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs have one great idea in them. Do you believe that? Do you believe what? There's another view.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
There's another view that, and I've heard it from Peter Thiel and others, that a great entrepreneur has that one great idea, and that success takes them away, and then the motive to keep coming up with the next idea doesn't happen. What's your take?
I think it's more that. I think people can come up with more than one great idea. So I think it's more like, creating a company is a very difficult thing. A friend of mine goes saying that creating a company it's like eating glass and staring into the abyss. It's just you have to do lots of things you don't like, and there are lots of seemingly intractable problems that come along, and so you have to put in incredible amounts of effort and a huge amount of stress, and it's much more painful than it would maybe let people realize, and most companies die, and on a certain level in your brain, your brain. We didn't evolve like with companies, right? So we evolved to respond to real death. And even though a company's death is not real, it's not like somebody's physically dying, your brain doesn't quite understand that, at the limbic system level. So it's really sort of painfully stressful. And I don't people probably don't want to go through that more than once.
Okay, final question for you. I have compared you, as others have, to Steve Jobs. Who do you think the next Steve Jobs is out there? Who do you admire and go, you know what, there's something going on over there?
Well, I'm a big fan of Larry Page. He's a good friend of mine. He does great things. Obviously, Jeff Bezos is doing some impressive stuff with Amazon. There's companies like Dropbox, and there's a bunch of Uber. There's cool things that are happening. But Steve Jobs was a very unique individual. I'm not sure there's anyone that's going to be like him for a long time.
Before I forget, I know I was supposed to ask you one more question. Microsoft. You want to be the CEO?
No.
No? Is it fixable?
If the right person was there, I'm sure it could probably be turned around with the right person there. There's a lot of talented people still at Microsoft, so the right person could probably steer the ship in a good direction.
Okay. Elon Musk, everybody. Unbelievable. Thank you for this conversation and for being so forthright and taking on these issues. Really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.